This is going to be a brief history of the manuscripts, books, and individuals who are most prominent in the study of the fittings for the Japanese sword. While swords were still worn in public, there were manuscripts, handwritten manuscripts, as early as 1621, and they continued the handwritten manuscripts well for 100 years. Woodblock printed books started in 1782, and then your regular printed books, as we see them today, the earliest is 1913. Most of these were written for private individuals who had them commissioned, and they were primarily written by dealers who sold fittings on the open market, mostly in Edo, naturally, but there were people in various provinces who commissioned works of that type. For the study of today's manuscripts, we have to go back to a man called Akiyama Kyusaku, who was born in 1843. He lived until 1936 at the age of 93. His most prominent student was a man called Nobuo Kawaguchi, who was born in 1884 and died in 1964. The next student, or last student, of Akiyama was Dr. Torigoye, and Dr. Torigoye was born in 1893 and died in 1978 at the age of 85. He was a student of Akiyama in the last 10 years, or a little more, of Akiyama's life. At that time, Akiyama didn't publish any actual books on his own, but he had a sword club group that he wrote for, and he wrote many manuscripts and articles for the sword club that he belonged to. There were quite a number of sword clubs from 1900, from 1900 on, and they all, a number of them exist today. But when Akiyama started his studies, there was no one else to help him, no one to guide him. He did it all on his own, through his own research and study of the pieces themselves. Unfortunately, most of that material, a number of them have been published. Honoré Joly of England had many of the articles that Akiyama wrote translated into English. Then I have taken those and added notations and additional information, and they were published by the Northern California Sword Club, probably 20 years or 25 years ago. There was no way of being a formal student. You had to ask a teacher if he was willing to take you on as a student, and in most cases it meant that you went once a week for 2 or 3 hours of study with your teacher, and that could go on for 10 years or more. Akiyama was a true connoisseur and a true observer of fittings, and preferred the iron fittings, iron guards, to the soft metal fittings. He also preferred the Muromachi to Momoyama period works to the Edo period because he was primarily interested in the quality of the iron and how it related to the particular guard that he was studying. So he was a true student of the metal itself and how it was translated into a work of art. Kawaguchi was, as John Yumoto termed him, he was a very good clerk. But he also specialized in the Goto family school, and he also specialized in other Edo period soft metal artists. He was not primarily concerned with iron fittings. He published one major book, which is called the Suba Taikon, which actually was an exhibit of Suba in Tokyo in the 1920s, and he had all the pieces that he was interested in photographed and then turned that into a quite good manuscript. There was not much published after that. After the war, there were a number of experts, again, mostly very fine dealers. Japan had its dealers also as experts, where they could both evaluate and write material on fittings, even though they were not pure scholars. And that came to the point where probably half a dozen dealers and others who were interested did some publications, mainly like in the Amiya, which was a man called Ogura Soemon. He printed books of the articles that he had for sale, but with descriptions which naturally enhanced the sale of the objects. But he certainly knew fittings and knew them very well, as did a number of others of his time. By 1930, the great masters had mostly passed away. So there was a period from 1930 to almost 1945 when very little was added to the available information, and they also didn't have many of the scholars who succeeded the great men of the 1890s to 1930. But by 1945, they were publishing again through two men, Dr. Homa and Dr. Sato Kanzan, who took many of the early manuscripts and then enhanced them and republished them. It was very strange. Hardly any of them put any original material added to the available material from these early publications. But they did republish them so that they became available to scholars today. But there's no way of determining if any of this material. Akiyama thought that almost all the books published in his time were useless and worthless. He said they had more misinformation than they had available information of any value. So he had no faith in the written material of his period. And that's certainly borne out when you see these manuscripts, and also when you see the books themselves. They certainly didn't contain anything that you could use for a study today. The woodblock print books were mostly drawings, which again did not help you with your study. But it's always been a tradition in Japan, even in the printed books of the 1940s and 50s, where they would illustrate a tsuba. Then the description under the illustration was no more than the available visual knowledge you could see in the picture. You know, it would say iron tsuba, round, such and such a design, and very little else. So they didn't elaborate on what they saw. They just took it as it was seen by the average person. I spent many hours translating these early illustrations, and then I discovered that I was wasting my time because all I could do was find that I had translated what I could see in the picture anyway, so it was a waste of energy. It wasn't until probably 1950 or even 1960 that a few books came out of private collections with very good illustrations. Not great, they were black and white. Color illustrations didn't come in until just about 20 years ago. So that the black and white manuscripts of the 50s and 60s are of some use in your studies, but naturally they don't tell you any more than what you can see in the photograph. The Japanese so-called experts have never been in the vein of disseminating information that was beyond the scope of, say, a beginning student. And they certainly didn't give you any information that was contrary to the articles or information that a person had written previously. It was just rehashing the same information time after time after time. And in many cases, they were mistaking the information. There's a classic example. Akiyama Kyusaku was shown a tsuba, openwork design with chrysanthemum and leaves, which was fairly common. And he said to the person who showed it to him, he said, if there were such a thing as a Kohagi-tsuba, which is the province of Choshu, he said, this is probably what it would have looked like. Well, the student dropped all the qualifying words out of the statement that Akiyama made and said, Akiyama calls this tsuba Kohagi. To this day, they're still called Kohagi-tsuba, and have no qualifying explanations, which Akiyama had put into the original statement. And unfortunately, that was not uncommon at all, because the student wanted to have his piece verified by the leading authority of his day, and he certainly wasn't going to put any qualifying material into the statement that he was making. So unfortunately, that kind of material came and went.